Yeah, good afternoon. Marnix Hoekstra. I'm one of the two creative directors at Fripak. Fripak's a yacht design company. We design boats.
I'm Paul from Norway. I'm running a project for a group of companies that is organized and it's called No Waste. Obviously, we work with no waste. And End of Life Boat is a project that we started some months ago. So I'm project manager for this, and I'm here together with Martin, who will show some fibers and what we're doing in that project later on. Thank you.
My name is Willem Dekker. I'm the president of the European Boating Association, and the European Boating Association is a club for national water sports associations. And I can say that through those associations I represent some 1.5 million boat users, or most of them boat owners. There are also the clubs involved, and clubs tend to have harbors, so we do recognize the phenomenon of left boats or orphaned boats or end-of-use boats, whatever you want to call them.
Good afternoon, my name is Pietro Angelini. I'm the manager of Navigo. It's a consortium of 150 companies in Viareggio, Toscana. There are the main important shipbuilders in the area, and we are working on the disassembling and disassembling in Fibreglass.
I stand up because you won't see me. Good morning to everybody. I am Mario Malinconico from Italy. I am a scientist at the Italian National Research Council, material scientist, but at the same time I'm the president of the Italian Solid Waste Association, and I work very much with Usina on the problem of recycling thermosetting material and turn them in thermoplastic material. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Enrico Benco, co-founder of GS4C. We are proposing a cradle-to-cradle solution for the composite industry using fibers that can be completely recycled at the end of life. So starting with a new proposition rather than looking for a solution for fiberglass. We also have solution for recycling fiberglass and all the other materials, but we're definitely looking to stop adding up to the problem rather than finding solution for the legacy.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Philip Eastel, and I'm the Secretary General of EBI. EBI is the European boating industry, so we have the European lobby for the recreational boating industry. So that includes everything from boat builders to equipment providers, but also marinas and so on. So this is a really substantial issue for us, and I look forward to the discussion.
Good afternoon. My name is Evan Ridley. I am an environmental program manager for the Rhode Island Marine Trades Association. We are a regional industry association in the Northeast United States. And for the last 2 years, we've been working on a project to demonstrate the value of end-of-life vessel material as an alternative resource for the manufacturing of cement.
Thank you. I'm Albert ten Bussen. I'm professor at Windesheim University of Applied Sciences. We have developed last 4 years a method of structural reuse of thermoset composites like boat hulls and windmill blades into more infrastructural products.
No, keep the mic okay. By the panel. Like I told you this morning, I gave a presentation about, let's say, the end of life of boats, abandoned boats, etc. And we already started in '97. But maybe the funny part is, there's a designer on this panel. The survey for abandoned boat and recycling systems, etc., was done by a designer, together with me. The designer was at that time a well-known designer. It was Ivan Embel in Norway. He is a Scandinavian well-known person, and he was convinced we have to start to think about the end of life of boats. And also, there are a lot of abandoned boats in Europe, not only in Norway. And secondly, we have to involve the designers. And I have the last 5 years moderated this panel, but it's the first time we have a designer. So I hope that everybody can agree that I give the first word to Marnix and to ask him what is his opinion to design boats in the future such a way that we can dismantle them, like it's in the automotive industry. We can reuse, let's say, the components, and we can recycle the materials.
That's a big question.
Yeah, I know. It's the first time you missed 5 years, so.
Yeah, so indeed, when we caught up and you introduced me to this happening, I think let's say the reason we're interested in this is because we feel a lot of times sustainability in whole is looked at some kind of personal sacrifice you have to make. You have to be more uncomfortable to do something. Or it's been looked at a lot as a political dilemma. You can see in the newspapers and the news all day the big debate there is in politics about this. And in all honesty, if I may reflect indeed on even our own little panel here, there's a lot of associations and people looking at it from, let's say, from a result we probably create as designers. So we at our company have said, we see this as a design challenge. It's nothing else than that. It's purely a design challenge. If we keep informing our owners that carbon fiber is the best fiber to use if you want to have a 60-meter high-performance sloop, and we don't even inform them that there is flux or there's bio-resin and stuff like that, what else will they build than a carbon fiber boat? What else will your boat builders build than a carbon fiber boat? Because that's in the end what basically we sold the client at the beginning. And that's just on the composite side. There's way more on the interior, on teak decks. I mean, we've been known for not using teak decks for nearly already a decade because there's just proper alternatives around. So the first thing I would like to say is when we spoke, we see this as a massive design challenge and nothing else than that. And if we do that, I think, I don't know, within a decade, we have far less problem than we have today.
Okay.
Secondly, obviously, we have the current state, so that is a whole different thing. I'm not sure if I should go into that now, but we do work on solutions as well as the current, well, this sad picture you have up there. But maybe that's for later in the discussion.
Okay. May I ask the person besides you? Norway has a lot of experience with recycling of boats. They were one of the first who started. Yesterday there was another meeting and it was also about recycling. And one of the main questions was also, is the recyclable material, is GRP recyclable? Secondly, what can we do with that particular part? And I think Albert will follow up with that question as well.
Yeah, that's true. We have in Norway, this was kick-started 2 years ago because the government started a policy that you could deliver a boat and you would get 100 euros. So instead of having to pay, you got money. So then we get a lot of boats, but what to do? And as everybody knows, to dismantle a boat, and in my project, which is a no-waste project, it's very, very labor-intensive to dismantle a boat and get the different pieces out, so you could get different metals, different plastics, and all that. So we're doing, as a test, we're doing a full cycle sustainability project, because this is not a good business case today. It's almost impossible to have a business case. So we have a cooperation with the government. We use unemployed youngsters. In Norway, they have to work at least 3 days a week to get the government support. If not, they work, they get nothing. So we sort the boat, we get in. We send some big pieces of GRP to Ecofiber Recycling, to Martin here, who has developed a method of grinding down so we can get different fibers out. And then we get the fibers back from him, and we start to make new products with them, with the same youngsters. But the problem right now, the major issue here, is that we can make a lot of products, but people in the industry dare not use it, or they don't want to invest or whatever. So we have found out that we need designers like Eivind, you know, and luckily we may have a breakthrough, because 2 days ago a roadside restal area got a prize in Norway. The architects, they used a lot of the recycled material in benches and stuff like that. And as you know, we have snow and ice in Norway, but these products can withstand everything. They are actually bulletproof. So we need to get ideas and designs so we can put this out.
Okay.
That's.
Can I ask Albert to follow up?
Yeah, thank you. And what you pointed out is very important about the business case, whether you can earn money with making products from reused thermoset, like the boat hulls and windmill blades. We have made different prototypes of reused composite, like the sheet piling profiles, and also for infrastructural applications in harbors. And technically this works, but the very important thing to industrialize is whether you can earn money with it, and that's difficult when you have a process that's too labor intensive and you use much new material to create your product. However, we found out that if you use a continuous process, a pultrusion-like process, then you can make profiles where you have sufficiently loading of reused material, so not too much virgin material, that the business case becomes positive. But that's then only for this continuous process. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel for that. But it's an important issue. Otherwise, you must find customers that pay substantially more than traditional materials, than a reused material.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Fine.
Can I just add up one thing about this? Because it is definitely very important to find the base case studies and a market niche that could be receptive for the solutions. And as I said, I mean, for fiberglass, for example, we looked into using it as an alternative, recycling fiberglass and build boards, and to use them as alternative to MDF. So for plugs and molds, for example. Yeah. This is a market that is using huge volumes of materials and has a very quick turnover, very quick turnaround of materials, because if a board can last 70 years, a plug will last a week and a mold will last a couple of years. So using recycled fiberglass to create plugs and molds, after we made a research with the Polytechnic in Milan to obtain the right density to be machined and to be able to laminate on it.
Okay. Because in that respect, I have a question in a kind of study. You mentioned, let's say, the molds used in our industry are mostly produced of foam. In foam is a substance we don't like, it's isocyanate. And isocyanate is on this moment under restriction, and even very strong restriction. So there's a big opportunity. Everybody's talking about business cases, especially with molds, to use this material instead of foam. Okay. May I ask Italy and then EBI to respond on what France is doing? First Italy.
Okay, but in our case, well, we believe that design is very, very important too. I mean, as a scientist, I see that the future is on a better design, better, let's say, better way of making a material easier to be disassembled. And we have been studied and working first with the aircraft composite material. And that was in some way quite easier because they are very modular material, much more modular than in yacht material. And so it was easier to reuse the carbon fibers epoxy material as a filler for a new material. And the other way is that we don't want to make again. Our idea is that is not a closed loop is not possible for thermosetting fiber reinforced material. So we put our knowledge on the interface of different polymers to work with thermoplastic matrices. And as a good thermoplastic matrix, we found polystyrene foam, which is used very much in mold too, but is used in containers, is used in loose fill packaging, is a material that is absolutely wonderful, and it could be mixed in a technological way with green thermosetting material, either glass or fiber, to get new materials that are at the end thermoplastic. And they can be used for furniture, they can be used for items for home, for lamps, for lights. And so the properties are good, and this is a way to go from a thermosetting material to a thermoplastic. Open loop. In our idea, open loop is one of the ways to solve the problem.
Okay. Tuscany.
We have done a very practical action. We have put inside of shipyard one boat, one piece of train, and one camper. And we try with the other cluster to analyze the system of disassembly and disposal of the other cluster as our. And we have seen, yes, the designer is very important for the future, very, very important. And because they analyze with us, with the person who work on the disassembly, all the error that can be changed in the future in the design phase. And in the second part of this project, we are searching many solutions in worldwide, and not only in yachting cluster, in nautical cluster, to check where is the money for the end of life of this project. Because if you don't find the money and a good business plan for the recycling, we don't find the investors. So we are working very, very hard on this phase, because we want to develop an industrial system, not only a research system. We have naturally the accord with university. We are working even with robots to do the disassembly phase, because there are many attention to the worker in this phase, because we are not in the automotive, naturally. We are not a similar object. We have both from 5 meters to 50 meters in fiberglass. So we have to standard even this kind of phase to be very practical. Thank you.
May I ask EBI and then later on EBA, because finance is every time coming back, and I come later.
Thank you, Albert. Before talking about France, maybe something to mention, which I think is really important here. We talked about the business case, and we need the funding for that. We need to scale up all of these great initiatives that we have here on the panel. And something that I would encourage all of you to do is to look at what the European Commission is doing in this area. There's a lot of funding available at European level, be it regional funds, be it specific innovation funds, but there's also a specific fund called the Blue Investment Platform, which is now starting, and there will be grants available, there will be investment readiness support available, so that's something I would look at in terms of SMEs. You asked about the French example, and I think that's an important example, and I think we owe a huge debt of gratitude to the French, because they have taken a leap of faith in implementing the first European dismantling system. I think it's a good system, and I think European countries have a lot to learn from that. I think they started this year. They have the first 1,000 or 2,000 requests for dismantling. So I think there's a lot to learn from that. But coming to us as associations, and with EBA and with ICOMIA as well, we are working with the European Commission to develop a European roadmap for end-of-life of boats, dismantling, funding, investment, mobile units, transport, legal issues. There's a lot of issues to consider. And I think if we deal with them at the European level, it's much better for our industry. Because I think what we want to avoid is a fragmentation of the industry, international markets, and I think that's quite important for us as an industry.
My experience sitting 31 years in Brussels is one voice for the industry, otherwise it's terrible. And I can add, let's say with European funding, there was a European officer, he was complaining to me that we brought in too less projects because he has a lot of money and he wants to give it to us, but we need to come up with proposals. So that was an open invitation, taking care of it, and I will inform everybody about it. We have to do it together. Finance is every time coming back, And that means also an impact on the boat owner.
Yeah, but before we talk about finance, I think you need to talk about emotion as well.
Yeah.
I think it is visual that a lot of boats deteriorate because the owners cannot say goodbye. That is definitely one source of creating end-of-use boats. Yeah. The other thing is that the breaking up of a boat in most cases cost money. In Norway, they had a quick solution to get the boats to a certain collection point, and then they had a new problem. I think breaking up a boat with a closed budget is not the biggest problem. The big problem is that all dismantling yards end up with a heap of FRP material in one form or another.
Yeah.
And the beautiful French system just mentioned, they don't have a real sustainable solution either. So what we need is what you were talking about in Italy, and what Albert is talking about is, in the end of the day, we need to have a process that can actually process the FRP waste material in big quantities. And for one reason or another, in the boating industry, we appear to be the proud owner of this problem, whereas when we look at the mass flows, we are only minute compared to the green world of wind industry. We're now going into a second generation or third generation of wind turbine blades, so there's a lot of old blade material coming on the market. You don't hear anybody about it. You don't hear anybody about the ecological impact of these sustainable energy sources. So we are a bit in the corner where we don't want to be. And what we need is a solution in the handling of our waste material. And at that moment in time, the problem of finding end-of-life boats all over the place because people don't want to pay for that dismantling will be solved rather quickly. That is my personal conviction.
Yeah, okay. Maybe just one quick response. The reason in Europe is then putting, let's say, a lot of priority to water-related legislations. A boat is in water. And on the moment when you're talking about an abandoned boat, authorities are really concerned about what can happen with it, what will be the effect on the quality of water. And drinking water in Europe is coming from our surface water. And that's what they explained to me, why they put a lot of effort to start with recycling, reusing. But I like to give the mic to another person who doesn't have the opportunity yet. Please. In respect to materials, finance, and business cases.
Certainly. Well, I think that it's appropriate to be talking about this approach here at Metstrade, where 3 years ago I arrived as sort of a researcher looking to identify alternatives to the primary end-of-life pathway for boats in the United States, which is landfilling at this point. And it was here that I learned from the European Composites Industry Association about the cement kiln co-processing pathway that had been adopted in Germany and elsewhere to deal with some of the wind turbine blade material that we had just heard about, and saw that there had been, along with some regulatory help, a strong business model for the collection and processing of this material before it is then handed on to an end user in the cement facilities. And we wanted to see how this applied to boats, not only from a technical standpoint, getting the verifications that yes, end-of-life vessel materials can be an alternative resource for cement manufacturing, but also how do you, as you mentioned, build a business model around that. And we know that we have the technical verification in the United States, just as we've observed here in the European Union. However, we are now looking at how boats really are going to serve as a foot in the door, and will have to serve as a foot in the door for a larger stream of composite materials that are currently being completely underutilized by cement manufacturers in North America, even while some of their counterparts in Europe have the internal information and technical know-how to apply some of these materials in their facilities. And so building that, we feel that it's important to have the verification that we've gained in the last couple of years around the quality of the material and its performance as an alternative resource that can cut back on carbon emissions and material consumption in cement making, but more importantly, importantly, I feel, is the development of the partnership network that we've established in our region in the northeast of the United States, where we've really married the expertise and perspective of the marine industry that has a lot of experience dealing with end-of-life vessels and the boat as a material bank, knowing how to capture value from certain points of salvage or certain points of scrap recycling, and combining that expertise with partners in the waste management sector that really have the expertise and the resources to take some of those processes and make them much more efficient. So we're continuing to look for ways to make the material separation and material processing stages much more economically efficient. Right now, for us, the biggest challenge is shredding the material down into a pre-processed form. Shredding is about 60% of the cost per vessel that we're seeing now in boats that are going through our program. So we're hoping to find partners that are able to help bring that price down for us and create a more friendly network environment for new partners to come in and participate in.
Okay, in that respect, I have another question also to Marnix. No, please. Oh. Okay, then I start with Marnix. We had yesterday, let's say, a special with the NMMA in the US and a debate on, let's say, in US you have a lot of boat builders and they're producing a lot of volume. In that case, in the future, how long it will take that we in the future have designs that, like in the automotive, it's easy to dismantle a boat?
Well, for me, that should not be the future. That is definitely possible to be the current state. Today, as many of you might know, the whole first creation of a boat takes place in the computer. Yeah. We create a boat in 3D from really every single nut and bolt until the very end in 3D in the computer. You can access that with virtual reality goggles. You can put training crews on them, etc. It's super easy, actually super easy as of tomorrow, to make sure there's also a training crew on dismantling these boats in 3D. That's before anybody has built anything. So that's that. Let's say to solve that future problem is really, like I said before, it's absolutely just a design challenge. It's possible. Any boat builder can do that today. They absolutely don't have to do that through us, but I'm happy to share our knowledge openly, and they can do that in-house. Okay. I mean, the thing we're talking about here, of course, is what do we do with everything which in the past 60 years we've created, right?
Yeah. But also looking to the past, but looking to the future, they're both important.
Well, stopping that for the future for me is designing the right product. Yeah. We've seen a lot of the let's say, if I may call it like this, the first generation solution of the current waste, which particularly goes into, I would call a bit more upcycling rather than recycling, because for me recycling would be to bring the material back to its original form. Yeah, which is a massive problem now for the current materials. That's why we can't use them in boat building anymore. And leading on to that is what I said in the beginning, is a design solution we're working on with European universities, because there is a procedure, a process scientifically in place which could do that, which is pyrolysis. And if you could use pyrolysis in the right way, you actually will dismantle the material in their original form. So you'll have the resin, you'll have the fibers, you'll have the stuff. And we're joining forces with the car industry, because tires have exactly the same problem. Yeah. Indeed, with the windmill industry. Or think about the sports fields, exactly the same problem. Carpets, same problem as us. This is a much bigger problem than just the marine industry. Yeah. And we've just started a project with them to build a pyrolysis device, which will actually break down these kind of things into their original form. And then you can actually use them as just building boats again.
Okay. So you want to respond as well?
Yes. Sure. Other two things, two idea from our project. One is the modular way to define every module on board. To use design in a modular way is one of suggestion, and the other put more sensor than we can, ICT sensor, because this is not only give solutions for use, but even for have information in all the part of the life of the boats. So if every part of the boats, naturally, where we can, we can use more ICT information on the boat during his life, and naturally this information could be very interesting at the end of the life of the boat.
Okay. Can I ask the two gentlemen to show the materials, and then...
Yeah, can I just add one thing about we need to define better what we mean by the recycling or reusing material. So we need to define what we define is a technological cradle where you can start looping. So this is what we did with recycled fiberglass, where we define a board that can always go back to itself. So when you recycle aluminum, you don't go back to bauxite, you go back to aluminum, which is this initial point where you can start looping, eventually minimizing the need for new material. Yeah. So, and the same thing is for fibers and for thermoset composites. Now, there is a panel over there, and the project with Hammer Yachts is about building the next super yachts with recyclable fibers. Yeah, this is thermoset, and we can go back, we can extract the raw material from the composite, and that goes back into the furnace for new pristine virgin fiber, which is our idea of recycling cradle to cradle. That doesn't add up, because yes, we can grind things up and use them as a filler, but how do you recycle that? We need to look forward, and also talking about just one last thing, talking about business models. I mean, every new material starts being more expensive than what you are producing at huge volumes. But then if you look forward, the next generation, the cost of the next generation of that fiber is going to be just the energy needed to remelt it. And this is an induction process. This is a material that has a very low embodied energy. So this is looking forward for this kind of business models. Yeah.
Maybe I can explain what I'm meaning. Let's say the meaning of reuse is you have the international approach for, let's say, recycling and waste management. The first is prevention. Second stage is reuse, but reuse of components. So not the material, but the components. And then recycling of materials. That means also we use it in the same sector. So reuse is meant components which are on board to use that again. And that has a higher priority because everybody's talking about recycling. And I'm always listening very carefully and nobody's talking about reusing. And that is also one of the main items. For example, classic boats are not recycled. No, they are reused, they are refitted and bringing back into the market. So that's what I mean.
Yeah, just one last note. We're all talking about end of life, but there's a huge problem with manufacturing waste. The composite industry is an industry that still works on a 30% on average manufacturing waste. If you think about a wind blade that weighs about 10 tons, 3 tons went to landfill even before the wind blade hits the turbine.
I can tell you we have to be ready in 2025 because then the big bunch of windmills are coming up. So that's
already there.
That's a cycle, and that's why I'm hoping to push the industry more forward. I've seen 3 gentlemen with materials. Can these 3 gentlemen explain what it is and where we can use for it?
I am the closest one. So according to the principle that we mentioned, turning thermosetting glass fiber or carbon fiber material into a thermoplastic, we create this open loop approach. The open loop means, can we find around other materials which can be combined in a new material together with glass fiber or carbon fiber? And we actually succeeded to spot a material that is loose fill packaging polystyrene or mold scraps of polystyrene in nautical industry. And of course, if you use clean material, those scraps from glass fiber and mold, you can get a material like this, which is even in the color quite appealing, because You see, you can see part of gel coats inside, but the material is quite clean and nice and performing. And this can be used as interior design in new boat industry, or even in furniture, or even in other application. If you use end-of-life boat and polystyrene packaging from agriculture or from fish packaging, you get a material like this, which is a thermoplastic material that can be turned into any shape you like. It can be injection molded, it can be calendared, it can be shaped in many different ways. And if you use carbon fiber combination with glass fiber, so epoxy and polyester mixed material, you get a material with polystyrene that is, let's say, black looking, of course, because of the carbon fiber. But you will come to the point of marketing. Marketing in sustainable approach is very important. A marketing department can make a difference, because we are in last century used to have seriality, but now in furniture, in appliance and so on, individual design are very much, let's say, looked. Designer look for individual, and material like this, which two sheets are never the same. They look different. So once you are sure of the mechanical properties that you supply are good, let's say a recycled material of the same properties of Corian or Okite, but it is thermoplastic and it is personalized in appearance, I think this is a good combination. So I think marketing should do also his job in this.
Okay. Can I ask the...
Yeah, I agree strongly in that, because this is a boat, a shredded boat, right? And if people get products with a good design, good marketing, I think people would pay a premium, because this is helping the environment. I mean, here you have a boat that's reused, to put it that way. But that could also help. We discussed the business case, which is really not there. And I think that design and marketing is a very important factor, because now we have technology. We can make things with this.
Okay. Just before you're starting, I'd like to have, let's say, one question for everybody after this, and then I have expecting questions from the audience, because it's too quiet over here.
Okay.
We need some response.
Okay, maybe. Well, I think it's very nice what you are making, Mario and Paul, and we think in the same way to kind of reuse the boat, not components, but turn it into reinforcement elements by shredding or sawing. So we focused on infrastructural products like beams and profiles. And we actually also use the strength and the water resistance that's still in the material, and that's important. So we do not close the first loop. We do not make from an old boat a new boat, but we make another product that is useful. And when this is at the end of the life, it can be reused into its same shape. Although you always need a certain amount of virgin material. In the same manner, when you reuse old paper, you need extra fibers as well. So that's something. But then you can close the loop for this material.
Okay.
You can go up to 70% of reused material, so only 30% of virgin material, which is essential for the business case. Well, it's a challenge to achieve this, but with a pultrusion-like process, we have shown that this is possible.
Okay.
Yep.
I have for everybody one question left. 10 years ago, we had the idea and the initiative to start up the development of an international standard for recycling of small craft, up to 24 meters. The meeting was in Milano, because the technical committee from ISO is based in Milano. And we had a very good presentation. I worked together with the French and the Italian mirror group, and we gave a lot of arguments. We set up the scope, and suddenly, quiet. But there's now a moment we are, let's say, making an inventory for new standards. And on this moment, I'm project leader within TC8, also with the marine industry. So I have an opportunity to start it again. What is your opinion? Do we need an international standard as a management tool in relation to, let's say, the recycling, the dismantling process, in relation to recycling of the materials, and in relation to reuse the materials?
You ask me?
Yeah, everybody.
Everybody.
So,
I think it's a great question. I think, from an industry standpoint, we need to be sure that, standards help the industry take ownership of any solution that comes to fruition. In the United States, I think one of the big pushes that we're trying to introduce through our project is interaction with manufacturing groups and folks that have not only the financial capability, but the internal motivation to take on some of these broader sustainability goals. And I think that having, for lack of a better term, a rule book or a playbook to base some of those actions on, certainly in North America where we feel generally behind what's been done in Europe so far, having the example set certainly helps the industry understand what it has to do to take responsibility in progressing through these solutions, but also I think it stands to benefit legislative and regulatory efforts that might want to find ways to force the hand of industry to be more proactive, and by doing so identify the most efficient ways to take those next steps, whether you are doing it proactively as part of the group of boat builders or group of manufacturers that is using these materials, but also from a government standpoint, how do you force industries that have this common issue to work together and proceed forward towards a solution together in a way that takes the experience that's already happened in other parts of the world and benefits from it, rather than trying to, say, reinvent the wheel in a totally different setting.
Okay.
I could repeat a lot of what previous speakers have said, but I think a clear argument for me why the answer is yes is this panel. We have a show and tell here almost. We have some really great examples of what can be done and what is already done. Again, it's about scaling up, and I think a standard is a good opportunity to get that done. But the other reason is, as has already been said, it's around policy and regulation. We need to make sure that we are proactive as an industry, and that policy doesn't attack us at the wrong time. We know with the European Commission starting on the 1st of December now, circular economy, the European Green Deal, all of this will be big priorities for the new European Commission in the next 5 years. And I'm sure it's the same in member states and across the globe. So I think if we can be proactive on that, we can be a good practice example for other industries. And I think it's important to work with other industries here, as we've heard, wind turbines and other areas. So a resounding yes.
Okay.
I think has been mentioned, but the key word is responsibility. Responsibility. We talk about responsible development rather than sustainable development. That means that every time you start with a raw material transformation, you should have already in mind what the end-of-life solution and how you will recover that raw material at the end of life. So, for example, with this recycled fiberglass that we use for plugs and molds, the plugs come back with the powder that has been machined out, and it goes back into the next. So material should be rented out rather than sold, to keep the responsibility to the original transformator.
Yeah, but coming back to the question, a standard, an international standard, because you're doing a lot of work, France is doing a lot of work, the Netherlands, Italy, but it's all different pieces.
Actually, the European community has a waste directive that talks about extending the responsibility. The extended responsibility for the original manufacturer is exactly that. Whoever makes the original item, the original material, should take the responsibility of the end of life. And this is already there. The normative, the directive is there. It just needs to be.
One correction. You're saying European. Yeah. I'm talking about international.
Of course.
Because we are in Europe. Yeah, I'm completely aware because that's my daily business, all the pieces of legislation in Europe and international. But I noticed that there's a big difference what we are doing in Europe than outside of Europe.
Absolutely.
So what I like to have is an international standard that as a management tool to develop on international level, one voice and one goal.
But if I can add one thing, we should stop waiting for directives and for laws imposing us to not to pollute and not to.
That's correct.
We are looking at the result now of choices made without any of this kind of responsibility. I mean, someone saying, I'm going to make a big profit out of this, someone else will solve the problem in 20 years from now.
No. This industry can only exist when you are taking care of the environment. You're not sailing in let's say, in a polluted area. You need a clear water, you need a clear environment, and that's normal, to my opinion. So
I think you're right. And at the moment, in my opinion, but also I think I can share it with Pietro, with the Navigo, the best standard international that has to be applied is a life cycle assessment, an environmental cycle assessment, because all the remaining parts are standards that already exist for materials. If you want to use it in appliance, in furniture, in whatever, then you have standards. International standard, ecotoxicity and so on, and mechanical properties, resistance, so on. But we must be honest in using life cycle and environmental cycle assessment. We want to compare all the technologies that we are here discussing with a serious scientific approach of life cycle. And the ISO standard today of life cycle are good enough to tell us in a long term what the material is going to be sustainable or not for the future generation. Life cycle, I think, and environmental cycle are the only international standard that needs to be applied today. I don't know.
I totally agree. Then I can add two things. One is that government can promote the good practices. Every state, every region have money from the UA, in our case, and can promote the good practices of company that working on this world. The second we have to improve the skills in the guys in the university on the life cycle assessment. We have to define what kind of skill we need in the new competences and in the new students in the universities.
Okay.
I don't think it's in my past to answer your question, but I would like to recall something else. A couple of years ago, we did an inventory mostly together with EBI, which is called Boat Digest. And the inventory was focused on what sort of equipment do you need, what sort of skills do you need to dismantle boats in a proper way. And I think what we need at this moment, as I'm the proud owner of most of the legacy, is that we share the knowledge and the best practices instantly, so that we can have a sort of international standard about, what the best way is to dismantle a boat and how to handle the material that's coming out of a boat. Yeah. And that is the current problem that my community at least is facing. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree absolutely. I have nothing to add. In our project, we also identified the lack of competences. So we're actually looking at bringing this part of the circular economy and reuse and all that into the schools in the higher classes. Yeah. But I have to add one thing, and that is, in Norway we get €100 for delivering boats, but that large boats are not handled. And large boats, you have the poorest owner is the last owner. And a dark and stormy night, the boat will sink, because it costs money to get rid of it. So I think also we need to, and I think that goes for boats in the Mediterranean and all over. So I think we should also keep an eye on that situation, the larger boats.
Okay.
having been participating in numerous standards writing, as you know, in my previous life, it hurts me a bit to say no. I don't think you should do that. Reason for this is that, like you've heard, I think you're unfortunately behind the curve, you know, behind the ball, because it will take, what we say, like 10 years before you're like at the level you can release it as an ISO. That the current generation, even lit under my generation, is certainly aware of this environmental problem and is working on it daily. As you can see on schools, I mean, when I was doing the naval architecture course, nobody's talking about it. Unfortunately, at the current university, nobody's talking about it, but at Windesheim, they're taking responsibility. So I would propose to allocate the money you're willing to spend on drafting a standard, going to the schools, teaching the kids, because that will get the whole problem just solved.
Okay. It's free country, so everybody has an opinion. Quite simple. And the reason for, let's say, I was asking, I'm dealing on this moment with an international standard. Has to be ready next year. And it is developed within 3 years, which is isocyanide in relation to environment. And I noticed, although we have a lot of regulations and legislations, a standard is a management tool. And you know, the guy in the field, in the workplace, he needs guidance. And that's one of the things why I'm always, I'm coming from aerospace, and in aerospace you have a lot of standards. It's all very strict. But when that's not needed, we don't do it. Quite simple. Questions from the audience. And we are limited in time. Two sides. First that gentleman, and then later on that gentleman.
All right. Thanks, Albert. We've heard a lot, from what I've heard, about recycling composites and carbon fiber and glass fiber. And I appreciate what a gentleman mentioned about life cycle assessment. We've been in discussion, so I'm sorry, I'm Florestan Fior from Sustainable Yachting Network. And we've been, and the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation, we've been in discussion with Association of Composites Manufacturer in America. Are you the person from Rhode Island? I didn't get that. Okay, I could have guessed it. But I know how Americans are big on that because it's a huge economy there. Rhode Island has a big problem in terms of abandoned boats and dealing with it. The issue is there still has to be yet to be seen an assessment on emissions. If you recycle, but you release a lot of toxic, emissions, and your energy consumption for it is actually quite bad, then recycling just doesn't make any sense. No. So we've been pushing, the Americans and the Europeans to deliver any kind of third party, at least a start of a third party assessment on emissions of recycling carbon fiber and fiberglass, and still has not been coming. So until it comes, it's not a good solution. I'm sorry. Okay. So I'll let you answer if you have anything to say about it.
Okay.
Okay, Willem, this is a question for you. I wrote a report for the IMO on end-of-life recycling boats, which was published this year, and the original remit of that was to find out the stance with regard to small island developing states which are having a problem disposing of abandoned boats and running out of space. And one of the things that they asked for is why aren't there compulsory registration systems which then have a levy passed on boat sales from new right the way down the line so that there is a fund. Now, at the risk of me being thrown out of here, and I know that there's some opposition to compulsory registration, Willem, I'll bring this back. So, the question from some of the small island states, why isn't there a compulsory registration schemes which can have a levy carried across? And I believe that's part of the French model that's been brought out.
No, we know registration in quite a few countries. We also know of countries like Sweden where they have disbanded the registration system for reasons best known to themselves. In the Netherlands, there will be a huge opposition to a registration system for boats. It was investigated some 20 years ago in coordination with a boat tax scheme. And the result was that the highest legal authority in this country told the government not to continue with this idea because the cost involved in making the system and making the system work was higher than the income coming out of the system. In France, they have a compulsory system. In France, they also have something else. A couple of weeks ago, I had a presentation from APER, which is the French organization that Philip mentioned. And they now dismantle the boats at no cost, as long as the owner brings it to the dismantling yard. And the money they need for the dismantling process, part of it comes out of the registration tax, because if you have a boat over 7 meters, you have to pay a registration tax. And part of the money comes from what they call an eco-tax system, which is a very small percentage on all new boats being introduced inside the country of France. So if an island state wants to have a registration system, they can do that themselves, because this is something that is within the scope of the governments themselves.
Yeah, sorry, I should, that's right.
There's one next to you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I should clarify, Willem, sorry, that the problem they're having is boats that are brought from other nations and left at the islands, and then they get the legacy of the vessels left behind, and they can't trace them. There's no registration system. So their question is, why can't these things have a compulsory registration system?
Yeah, there's also experience with that, because we do know of boats that should have been registered looking at the flag of the country they're coming from, and there are sufficient ways to move the registration, unless it's kind of branded into a boat, which you can do in this country, I know, but that is a separate system which has to do with proof of ownership, and is a requirement when you want a certain certification for the boat. So I'm afraid that is a problem that is similar to cars, but at least the cars have an engine number stamped into it and a chassis number, so you can, in theory, trace it back.
Yeah. Any questions more? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I know we just skipped it, but you know, all these guys are talking recycling. I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but can these guys, you guys working on recycling composites and carbon fiber and fiberglass, what is done to evaluate the environmental impact of that recycling process?
Yeah. Who is the question?
What is done?
No, to whom? Okay.
All I can disclose is that we made some evaluation on the energy required to clean up the fiber from the resin, and that was optimized to clean up fiberglass, which is worth of nothing as soon as it comes out of the pyrolysis process, but other fibers are worth recycling. And the cost of the energy was well worth investigating, even economically. So I know that so that is the initial step to identify if this is worth pursuing or not. So the energy required to clean up the fibers from the resin is I don't have the figures right now by heart, but it's definitely, I mean, we're talking very, very little compared to the value of what you recover. Again, I'm not talking fiberglass. I'm talking carbon fiber, I'm talking enriched mineral fiber that can then be remelted. And if you start off with a fiber that with a very low embodied energy, you can sum up the embodied energy of the final fiber of the original raw material, the fiber that is being produced, and the fiber coming from the recycle process. So the second generation fiber is a fiber that will go into the furnace without having to go through the mining, the crushing, the optimization of the raw material. So the environmental cost of the second generation fiber, when it's a cradle-to-cradle fiber, is a lot less than what is the original one.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's a really important question recognize, and I think that obviously, as was stated, more information is needed to fully evaluate the impacts of our process in the United States. We do know that working with an industry like cement manufacturing, an industry that uses 7% of all available energy globally, finding opportunities for beneficial material reuse, especially as sort of a introductory first step to get to the next level of the waste management hierarchy and begin to build beyond landfilling and some of the other less desirable traditional outlets. It's an essential capacity building step that for us has been just as valuable as any technical verification, as I mentioned, because it has allowed our industry to build some really essential and critical relationships with waste management and regulatory players that will have a strong role in helping to take those other solutions that are out there in development. We know that there's a lot of really smart people putting a lot of time and a lot of money into developing more sustainable opportunities beyond cement kiln co-processing. We do see it as not the silver bullet and final solution, but rather the first step in moving beyond what has traditionally been taken care of. And I recognize that ACMA in the United States and other industry organizations can do more to incorporate this kind of information, this kind of outlook into life cycle assessment tools. That's one thing we're hoping to contribute as part of this project, some of the impacts of our role. But we know it's a first step and not a final step.
Okay. They told me I have to close down the panel. There's now one question. Oh, okay. There's a mic. Yep.
Hi, this is not exactly about recycling of material, but of the new materials that we might move to instead of what we use today. This might be to the material scientists. I don't know how familiar you are with the biocomposites. They look really interesting to me as a designer, but I worry about two things. Are their properties inconsistent? And might the boat start decomposing prematurely?
Well,
I think a quite important question.
I think it's an important issue, but I am also the president of ASSO Bioplastic Scientific Committee, so I deal very much in it. The first, let's say, target is to use bio-based material, which does not mean exactly a biodegradable resin. It's a resin that comes from new carbon instead of carbon from fossil. And with this new approach, you can get practically in few years all the resins that today comes from oil, you get them from renewable carbon. So this gives you a good carbon footprint of the resin. And with that, really, when you have in a hand a composite made of a bio-based resin or a composite by fossil, you will not understand any difference. You will not recognize any difference. If we come to the biodegradable material, it is premature at the moment to talk about industrial application in such a harsh environment like is it marine, water in general environment. That's why mostly activity is concentrated on packaging, substituting of single-use plastic. For durable material, there are some trials in scientific, but of course durability and biodegradability are sometimes very much conflicting. And what do you mean by the biodegradability? Is the material, I can leave the material in water and take it there because sooner or later the marine environment will degrade it. It will be such a long time anyway because of the thickness of the resin and so on that is hard. And if you send the boat in a composting environment, it will take a huge amount of time. They will never accept it. So there are possibilities in like foam material, rigid foam material made of polylactic acid resin, for example, with the fibers inside. You can start, let's say, dealing with the material that in future, but at the moment it's really premature, absolutely premature.
Okay.